Hey everyone, Jack here. For those who follow my YouTube channel for the pipe smoking discussions, this is not about that. I want to talk about a story that broke last week in Canada and that is drawing a lot of attention. And that is the fact that a mass grave of 215 children was found at a residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. Now, for those contacts of mine who are in the US or in the UK or elsewhere in the world that may not be familiar with the history, in the late 19th century, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Government of Canada instituted a program called residential schools. They thought it would be a great thing to go to all of the indigenous communities, rip children from their parents, literally, bring them to these schools to re-educate them. Explicitly on the part of the government, it was an attempt to kill the Indian in the child, to make them ashamed of their culture and their history and their heritage, and to try to integrate them into this new Canadian society. In those residential schools, they suffered horrendous physical, sexual, and mental abuse, and many of them died. And this is a story that broke last week at one of these residential schools in, like I said, in Kamloops, British Columbia. A mass grave of 215 kids was found. On the one hand, I'm glad it's making the news. It's helping drive awareness about this insane part of our history. And I hate saying this word because our prime minister used the same word. It's a dark chapter of our history. Thing is, it's not that old. It's not like it happened 100, 150 years ago. The last residential school closed in 1996. There are people very much alive today who went to these schools, or children of parents who were taken from their families and went to their school. So they're still living through this pain of these horrific institutions. And what I'm seeing now this week and over the weekend is a bunch of people on Facebook putting these pretty little frames saying, all children, every child matters, and posting these pretty memes. And fine, I mean, to some extent it's driving awareness of the history there and the issues, but it's not going to be enough. Like, what do you think that putting a pretty frame on your profile picture on Facebook is going to do? It's not going to do anything. It's going to do jack shit to change things. What needs to happen is people need to know what happened and what these people went through. And we didn't learn that in school. I certainly didn't learn any of that history in school. My first exposure to this was just a few years ago when I took a course, an online course by a bunch of wonderful people at the University of Alberta, I think it was, that put together a course called Indigenous Canada. You know what? It's free. You can go online and take the course. The only cost, if you will, is a bit of commitment of your time to learn what happened and learn the history. Read some books. My wife and I read something called They Called Me Number One by Bev Sellers out in Western Canada, who's a survivor of one of these schools. I tell you, if you can make it through this book without shedding a tear, you're less than human. They're horrendous stories, horrendous things these people went through. And we still haven't fully acknowledged. The Roman Catholic Church hasn't even owned up to their part of this. It's unacceptable. And there's still a ton of racism in the settler community, what we refer to as the settler community, and I'm definitely part of that. My ancestors came from France to what is now Quebec, Canada, in the mid or late 17th century. So been here a long time. I don't know if they've done some horrible things, if they were part of all that, or if they were actually collaborative and friendly with the First Nations that were here. I have no idea of that history. And I certainly don't believe in guilt by association. I'm not going to go cry in a corner and self-flagellate because I'm part of that descendants. But I think what we can all do to make things better and to help the situation is learn about what happened. And maybe that'll drive some more compassion and understanding of what these people have gone through and are still going through today, the pain they're still feeling. And it's still very pervasive. Just last fall here in Quebec, an Indigenous woman, her name was Joyce Echaquan, was lying in a hospital bed in medical distress, calling for help, And the only help she got was nurses and attendants spewing racist comments at her. And they let her die. Like, it's unacceptable. It's reprehensible what's going on. So maybe if we learned a little more of the history of these residential schools and what these people have gone through, it would help. Instead of just putting a little frame, a cute frame on your profile picture on Facebook, and then what? In a week, we're going to get rid of it, or something else will come along that'll shock us and we'll change it to frame. We need to learn what happened. So look into it, read up on it, and maybe that'll help. You know, the one word I think of when I think of First Nations, and I do know people in First Nations. I work with First Nations, and I've met some in Alberta, met some people. They're wonderful people. But the one word that comes to mind when I think of all of the First Nation communities in Canada is resilience. Despite everything that's been done to them by the church, by the Canadian government, and by the racism they still face today, they're still around. They're resilient. Can't say as much for the settler community or the rest of the world. Just look at what's been happening in the pandemic for the past year. Oh my God, people crying and finding it so hard, and mental issues, and what? You had to stay home a little bit to help curb the spread of a virus. You had Netflix and a million other media that you could watch. You have more technology than humanity's ever had access to, and stay in touch with everybody. The grocery stores were always full of food. We never ran out of anything. But oh my God, it was so hard, and it was so tough, and the mental issues. Imagine what Indigenous people have gone through and are going through. So let's do something about it. Let's learn, right? Put some links below the video here. Start with that. Like I said, it's a free course. Just a bit of time to learn. Cheers.